Hey there. Tonight, we're not talking about knights in battle or burning castles. We're going somewhere softer, stranger, and slower. We're visiting the court of one of the most powerful and poetic women in medieval Europe, ELEANOR of Aquitaine, Queen of 2 nations, patron of poetry, mother of kings, and for a little while, your host. So, before you get cozy under your blanket, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if this kind of calm, historical storytelling is something you'd like more of. And if you're in the mood, drop a comment below, telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always comforting to know we're not the only ones awake out here. Now, if you've got a candle or lamp nearby, go ahead and light it. Let the room go dim. Pull your blanket close and let the soft hum of background noise settle you in. Let your mind drift back in the year 1170 to the stone streets of the place where Eleanor's court quietly comes to life. You've arrived in Poitiers. You don't know how long it's taken. Time is strange in the 12th century. Roads are worse. Your sense of direction? Gone. So are your shoes. Well, nearly. One is hanging on by a prayer, and the other has started chewing on your heel like it's mad at you. But you made it. You're standing, well, sort of slumping, at the edge of the city, coated in a fine, respectable layer of mud, horse sweat, and whatever that mysterious substance was that splashed on you outside that roadside tavern. You didn't ask. You didn't want to know either. The sun hasn't risen fully yet. Just a thin line of gold slicing open the night above the rooftops. The bell tower in the distance begins to chime, slow and solemn, like it's already tired of the day ahead. The wind smells of smoke, baking bread, and the kind of wet stone scent that only comes from very old buildings and very questionable plumbing. You shuffle forward. Your legs feel like old planks. Your shoulders crack like a bag of walnuts every time you move. Someone should write a ballad about your posture. Ode to a human pretzel. You pass under the city's gate and try not to flinch as the guards give you the kind of long, appraising look that suggests they've seen worse, but not often. Then, just ahead, the palace. It's not what you expected. This isn't some Disney fantasy castle with turrets and glitter and chirping birds doing your laundry. No, this is Romanesque stonework that means business. Towering walls, the color of dried bone. Arched windows that squint at you like skeptical librarians. Gargoyles that are somehow both grotesque and judgmental. It's beautiful, in a terrifying way, like being inside a cathedral built by people who definitely had secrets. You reach the first set of gates. They creak open with the kind of dramatic groan usually reserved for haunted mansions. A man in a hooded cloak nods at you, wordlessly, and gestures you forward. You're too tired to ask questions, and he seems like the kind of person who'd answer everything in riddles anyway. You pass through a narrow archway. The sound of your boots on the flagstones echoes around you. Click, shuffle, click. Regret. The air is cooler here, and heavy with the smell of wax, iron, and wet fabric. There's a second gate, then a courtyard, then another gate. This is less of a palace and more of a stone onion, layer upon layer, each one more intimidating than the last. You think about turning back. Then you think about your feet, and the fact that turning around would mean passing the guards again, and they look like the kind of people who keep count of who enters. but not necessarily who leaves. Finally, the Great Hall. And by hall, we mean a cavernous chamber with ceilings so high they should have their own weather patterns. Tapestries flutter like nervous birds in the wind leaking through the cracks in the walls. Candles line every surface, throwing gold light that dances on the stone. You hear music faintly from somewhere deeper in the palace, a harp, maybe, or a very sad lute with performance anxiety. A steward appears beside you. You didn't hear him arrive, which is concerning. He looks you over with the kind of expression that says, "I know how much you smell, and I've already forgiven you, but only slightly." "You're here for the Queen," he says, as if that explains anything. You nod. Why? You don't know. You just do. He turns. You follow, mostly because your body is moving without permission now, operating purely on medieval autopilot. Your brain is 15 miles behind you, possibly still at the inn, trying to figure out whether that stew was supposed to be gray. The inner corridors are lined with torches and painted plaster that's peeling like sunburnt skin. The scent of rosemary drifts past you. Somewhere, someone is boiling herbs. Somewhere else, someone's dog is barking at a chicken. These things are probably unrelated, but in medieval palaces, who knows? You pass doors carved with Latin inscriptions you can't read, windows of thick, bubbled glass. A girl in a silk dress giggles and vanishes around a corner. A monk mutters something under his breath about decency and unruly curls. There's an energy here, quiet, pulsing, expectant. And then you stop. You're standing in front of a heavy wooden door. The steward turns, opens it slowly, and gestures inside. You step through. You're now at the court of ELEANOR of Aquitaine. There's a fire burning low in the hearth. A cat stretches on the windowsill like it owns the place, which it probably does. A scribe hurries past, clutching an armful of scrolls. A pair of women in elaborate dresses whisper in the corner, their words like wind chimes. Quick, tinkling, dangerous. You are not in Kansas anymore. You straighten up, or try to. Your spine makes a sound like a wheelbarrow full of bones. No one rushes. Nothing is urgent. Time moves differently here. It isn't measured by clocks, but by poems, by letters, by the slow unfolding of conversation. You're not sure if this is the beginning of a job or the beginning of a spell, but either way, you're in too deep now. You've arrived at the heart of something ancient, powerful, and curious. This is the court of the Queen of the South. And outside, the bells begin to ring again. In the early 12th century, Poitiers was more than a city. It was a symbol. As the capital of Aquitaine, it sat at the crossroads of power, wealth, and shifting dynasties. Its cobbled streets carried the weight of ancient Roman foundations, its walls fortified across generations to hold off both invaders and time. By the time ELEANOR of Aquitaine inherited the duchy in 1137, Poitiers had become one of the richest and most culturally vibrant territories in France. The city woke slowly. Bells marked the hours, originally for monastic prayers, now repurposed by the court to organize its rhythm. Travelers arriving at dawn found the stone underfoot still damp from night mists. Cathedral towers pierced the skyline like lances aimed at heaven. Even the air carried a fragrance, old incense from the churches, damp hay from the stables, crushed herbs from the markets. Eleanor's palace was not a single building, but a complex, a blend of Romanesque solemnity and feudal practicality. Defensive walls surrounded the halls, where politics and poetry intertwined. As one passed through the outer gates, the hierarchy became tangible. Guards with chainmail and axes, clerks with ink-stained sleeves, and somewhere near the heart of it all, the Duchess herself, Eleanor, Queen of the South. The moment you step inside the great hall, the heavy wooden doors shut behind you with a solemn thud, as if locking away the outside world. The air here is different, thick with scents and sounds that pull you into a world far removed from the muddy streets and straw beds you left behind. The palace smells of rosemary and ink. It's an odd combination at first, but somehow it fits perfectly. Rosemary, crushed and fresh, tucked into bouquets here and there, filling the stone corridors with a faint herbal sharpness that clears your mind. And ink, the black, liquid kind, spattered on parchments and scrolls, promising stories, secrets, and knowledge, penned in 1,000 tiny strokes. This is no ordinary royal residence. Eleanor's court is not just a seat of power. It's a cradle of culture, a sanctuary for poets, scholars, and artists who breathe life into words. As you make your way through the hallways, you notice slender figures bent over parchment tables, their faces lit by the flickering glow of candles. Young scribes, barely out of their teens, sit cross-legged on low benches, copying texts from the classical poet Ovid. Their quills scratch softly, a rhythm that echoes like a whispered chant. You watch as one young man dips his pen carefully, the ink shimmering before it settles onto the creamy vellum. Each letter, each swirl, is precise and deliberate, as if the very future of literature depends on his care. The texts themselves are stories of love, exile, gods, and mortals, and their ancient words mingle with the murmurs of this medieval world, blurring time itself. Nearby, a young girl's voice rises above the hush, a clear, lilting sound reading aloud in Latin. She's a striking contrast to the scribes, dressed in a modest yet elegant gown, her voice steady and practiced. She reads to the Duchess herself, Eleanor, who sits draped in velvet and embroidery, her eyes closed, absorbing each word as if it were a secret whispered only for her. The language is foreign, yet it holds a magic all its own. You realize this is a moment not just of learning, but of deep connection. The stories of ancient Rome, the wisdom of forgotten philosophers, and the lyrical beauty of poetry are alive here, woven into the fabric of daily life. Eleanor's court is a refuge for the mind and soul, where letters and legends hold power equal to swords and crowns. You glance around and notice that the palace walls themselves seem to hum with the echoes of countless conversations, debates, and readings. Scrolls and manuscripts are piled high on wooden tables and shelves, some tied with ribbons, others rolled and sealed with wax bearing Eleanor's personal crest. The presence of so much written word is surprising. This is the 12th century, after all, a time when books are still rare treasures, copied laboriously by hand in monastery scriptoria. Yet here, in the Queen's court, knowledge flows as freely as wine at a feast. It is a place where art and intellect intertwine, where music mingles with manuscript, and where the written word is as valued as any jewel. The scent of ink is mingled with beeswax from the candles that burn steadily in iron sconces. Their soft glow casts dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the intricate tapestries that tell stories of chivalry and myth. You catch a faint hint of lavender and rose, herbs carefully chosen not just for their fragrance, but for their symbolism. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for calm, roses for love and beauty. Even the air in this place is curated, as if Eleanor herself commands every detail to craft an environment where inspiration can flourish. It's a sensory experience, unlike any you've known. Comforting, yet stirring. Grounding, yet transporting. At one table, you notice a small gathering of troubadours, their fingers lightly touching delicate strings of a lute and a harp. They hum softly as a poet recites a new work, a tale of a woman's courage, written in delicate verse. The court listens intently, some nodding, others smiling knowingly. This is not mere entertainment, but a form of communication, a way to discuss ideas too dangerous or bold for direct speech. Poetry here is a language of power, wit, and subtle rebellion. You observe the scholars and scribes exchanging books and ideas in a dozen languages: Occitan, Latin, French, Arabic. Eleanor's court is a melting pot of cultures and tongues, a crossroads where East meets West. Scholars who have traveled to Toledo and Antioch bring back manuscripts filled with knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Their presence turns the court into a beacon of learning and curiosity amid a world often defined by ignorance and fear. Watching all this, you feel the hum of possibility. This is not the dark, grim, and ignorant Middle Ages you expected. It's a world of light and shadow, of intellect and art, where the queen's sharp mind reigns supreme. Eleanor of Aquitaine's court is a kingdom of words, where stories are weapons, where ideas spark alliances and rivalries, and where every scroll carries a dream. You breathe deeply, the mingling scents of rosemary and ink filling your lungs, grounding you in this extraordinary moment. The palace has wrapped itself around you, a tapestry of sounds, scents, and visions, inviting you to lean closer, listen harder, and open your heart to a world where culture and power are inseparable. For now, you are a guest here, a silent witness to a court that thrums with life and intellect. You realize that to truly understand the Middle Ages, you must forget what you think you know about darkness and ignorance. Because here, in Eleanor's court, the light of knowledge burns bright, even if only for those who dare to see. And with that, your journey into this delicate, fragrant world has just begun. The court of Eleanor of Aquitaine was a library disguised as a court. Here, ink was as precious as gold, parchment nearly sacred. In Eleanor's Poitiers, literacy was no longer the sole domain of monks and scholars. It had become a mark of courtly refinement. Her palace, rebuilt and expanded in the 12th century, smelled not of blood and conquest, but of waxed wood, pressed herbs, and the metallic tang of fresh ink. Eleanor had been educated in the classics. Raised in a duchy steeped in Gallo-Roman tradition, she could quote Ovid, Cicero, and the Psalms with equal grace. Her court followed suit. Latin, the sacred tongue of Christendom, was spoken fluently by her scribes and secretaries. But alongside it, Occitan, the lyrical language of the troubadours, bloomed in the corridors. French and even early English could be heard in passing, spoken by diplomats and exiles. Scribes worked in alcoves lit by oil lamps and shafted morning light, their fingers cramped from copying not only legal decrees and diplomatic letters, but poems. Yes, poems, love songs, laments, and epic ballads, that traced their ancestry to Virgil and their rhythms to the lutes of southern France. A girl not older than 15 might sit by a window with a book of Virgil open in her lap, reciting verses aloud in practiced Latin, as a duchess nodded approvingly. Books themselves were rare and guarded treasures. They were copied laboriously by hand, each line a work of care, every margin filled with glosses and decorative flourishes. Eleanor's court, unlike many in Europe at the time, was not content with piety and politics. It was determined to resurrect the intellectual brilliance of Rome and the sensual artistry of Al-Andalus. Rosemary bundles hung from ceiling beams to ward off pests and ill humors. But nothing could keep out the passion for ideas. Here, knowledge was not passive, it was performative. Readings became events, translation acts of diplomacy, composition a public art. Poets read aloud in salon-like gatherings, and philosophers debated under Eleanor's gaze. This was a queen who not only ruled, but read, whose court copied love poems and legal codes with equal reverence. It was a place where parchment and perfume mingled, and history was written by candlelight. The women here aren't idle. They speak in tongues, literally. Latin, Aquitaine, French, even a smattering of Arabic and Spanish slip from their lips as naturally as breathing. These aren't just ornamental skills. Multilingual fluency is a tool, a sign of status and intellect, and you, suddenly the outsider, sit in awe, the silence in your throat nearly a gasp. Because they do not just talk, they duel. They weave their words like tapestries themselves. In one corner, a young noblewoman debates the latest troubadour's song. She praises the melody, but questions the lyric's portrayal of love, twisting meaning with a sly smile. Her friends counter with verses of their own, some playful, some scathing, all sharpened with elegance. Flirting here isn't a simple exchange of glances or coy smiles. It's a duel in rhyme and meter. The way they toss compliments, challenge each other's wit, and respond in couplets makes you realize that courtly love isn't just a fanciful ideal. It's a practiced art, a strategic performance, and the ladies are the masters. You watch as a particularly confident lady rises, her silk dress whispering secrets as she moves across the hall. Her voice carries clear and steady as she recites a newly crafted poem, half confession, half provocation, about a knight who's more proud of his sword than his soul. The room listens, rapt and silent, and then bursts into murmurs of approval or mild scandal. This is not the polite chit-chat you expected. This is intellectual warfare, disguised as art, and every word has weight. You realize quickly that beauty here is never simple. A lady's face might be softly framed by ringlets, but her eyes are hard as flint. Her smile might appear gentle, but behind it is a mind plotting the next clever remark or the subtle insult that will leave her rival speechless for a week. They speak of philosophy, quoting Aristotle and Boethius with ease, then move on to dissect the latest news from distant courts, politics, alliances, betrayals. This court is a salon, a university, and a theater all in one. But despite the intellectual rigor, it's never dry or dull. They laugh a lot, and their laughter is a weapon too, cutting through tension, lightening the weight of power struggles, and forging alliances. They sing old ballads, sometimes improvising verses on the spot, celebrating love, loss, or the sheer absurdity of court life. Their voices rise and fall like the sea, weaving tales that bind them together in shared tradition and fierce loyalty. And it's not just words. The ladies are trained in music and dance, their fingers nimble on lutes and harps, their feet graceful in slow, measured steps. Music here isn't mere entertainment. It's a language, a way to communicate secrets and desires beneath the polished surface of the court. When a lute string snaps, the room gasps. When a harpist's fingers falter, the ripple of surprise is unmistakable. Perfection is expected. Mistakes remembered. You also notice the politics wrapped around the silk and the music. Each lady represents a family, a region, a powerful alliance. Their presence here is a statement. Their words, carefully chosen, can shift favor or ignite grudges. Gossip is currency, but only if it's clever and subtle. A badly placed insult could cost a lady her standing, or worse, her future. And futures are on everyone's mind, for marriages here are less about romance and more about strategy, the chess pieces on a grand political board. At times, the atmosphere thickens as the conversation turns to courtly love, that delicate dance of yearning and restraint. They speak of it not as fools in love, but as scholars dissecting an ancient text. Is love noble or a dangerous game? Is it freedom or a chain? The debates often circle back to poetry, for poetry is the language of the heart and the sword of the mind. And you sit there, feeling the weight of the moment. You, a visitor from another time, awed by this world where words hold power as real as any sword, where every sentence might be a trap, every compliment a challenge, every verse a revelation. You see these ladies not as mere courtiers, but as rulers of an invisible realm, where wit is weaponized and intellect is the crown. You think you understand medieval court life. After all, you've seen the movies, the dramatized battles, the lavish costumes. But this is something else. Here, beneath the silks and the candles, you discover a world where survival isn't just about strength or swordsmanship. It's about sharpness of mind, quickness of tongue, and the ability to hold your ground in a sea of sharp eyes and sharper words. And that realization hits you with a quiet force. If you thought surviving the Middle Ages was only about fighting off invaders or enduring plagues, you were wrong. Sometimes, the deadliest battle was the one fought in hushed whispers and eloquent poetry. So you lean in a little closer, letting the conversations wash over you, letting the verses wrap around you like the silk gowns that flow past. You might be out of place, but you're here. And in this hall of glittering minds and silver tongues, you're learning what it really means to be a lady of the court. Because here, in this world of silk and sharp words, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. At Eleanor's court, women did not sit silently by the fire or demurely wait for men to speak. They were the speakers, the thinkers, the orchestrators of language and wit. It was said that to survive in the court of Poitiers, one needed two things: a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. The silk gowns worn by Eleanor's ladies were imported from Byzantium, dyed in indigo and madder root, adorned with gold thread and tiny pearls. But beneath that elegance lay a force of intellect. These were not idle, noble women. They were political actors, philosophers, and poets. They debated the merits of Plato over Aristotle. They quoted Boethius in Flirtation. They read Augustine by candlelight and translated Arabic texts carried in from Spain. Courtly love was more than a romantic game. It was a linguistic battlefield. Verses became duels. rhymes could cut deeper than steel. The women of Eleanor's court spoke not only Aquitaine and Latin, but sometimes Greek and Arabic. Some were daughters of bishops, others of barons, but they all learned the art of argument and the performance of presence. A misplaced metaphor could cost a suitor his reputation. A well-placed compliment might win a patronage or a marriage. Poetry was their preferred weapon. Songs were composed, traded, judged, and remembered. Troubadours came seeking favor, but often left embarrassed, outmatched in charm and erudition by the Duchess's own ladies. One chronicler described the court as a school of elegance and discourse. Another said it was the brightest light of the Latin West. In a Europe where most women were excluded from education, Eleanor's circle defied the mold. Here, beauty was not enough. One had to dazzle with metaphors, confound with logic, and sway with rhythm. It was an intellectual salon, masquerading as a court, and Eleanor herself was the head mistress of this formidable academy. Among Eleanor's most enduring and debated legacies is the court of love. Whether it was a formal institution or an elaborate poetic fiction, medieval sources suggest that Eleanor and her daughter Marie of Champagne presided over staged trials, where cases of love were debated in mock judicial fashion. These courts were often held in elaborately decorated halls, possibly beneath tapestries of Venus and Cupid. Knights would present their grievances: a lady too cold, a love unreturned, a betrayal imagined. The ladies of the court would listen, confer, and offer a judgment, sometimes playful, sometimes harsh. These weren't legal decisions, but commentaries on the nature of affection, fidelity, and emotional conduct. The rules of courtly love, fin amour in Aquitaine, were taken seriously at Poitiers. Love, in this tradition, was seen as ennobling, spiritual, and often illicit. Marriage was a matter of property. Love was a matter of virtue. And Eleanor's court, soaked in the ideals of chivalry and lyrical philosophy, treated the matter with both ceremony and satire. Such trials gave women public voices in an era where their speech was often limited. It turned romance into rhetoric and emotions into theater. In one example, a knight who complained that his lady ignored his suffering was told that true love must suffer to be proven. Another tale suggests a lady was reprimanded for toying with multiple suitors. Now, you've stumbled upon one of the most peculiar and beguiling scenes in the entire medieval world, the court of love. No, it's not some dusty trial with grim judges and rusty swords. This is something altogether different. Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen, patroness of poetry, and master of social theatrics, has gathered her ladies-in-waiting beneath an enormous tapestry woven with the image of Venus herself, the goddess of love, beauty, and mischief. The air is thick with anticipation and something more electric, something that smells faintly of rose oil and burning beeswax. It's here, in this soft-lit chamber, that matters of the heart are weighed, judged, and debated. But don't expect a somber courtroom with stiff robes and wooden benches. This is a play, a game, a subtle battle of wits and desires, and you, for a moment, are an invisible guest. The queen herself presides, draped in rich silk and adorned with pearls that catch the flickering light like little stars. Her eyes sparkle with amusement and the sharpness of a hawk as a knight steps forward. He's no ordinary man, but one who dares to plead his case before this all-female tribunal. The topic? His love, whether it is true, worthy, or simply a foolish folly. He speaks with the confidence of a man who has jousted for fame and honor. But here, his armor feels strangely out of place. The ladies listen, some biting their lips, others nodding as though weighing every word in the balance of their own secret hearts. Eleanor leans forward, the subtle curl of her smile hinting at approval, or perhaps the promise of a clever rebuke. The mock trial unfolds slowly, like a delicate dance. One lady rises to deliver judgment, not with a hammer or law book, but with poetry and sharp wit. Her words float over the chamber like a song, teasing the knight, probing the sincerity of his declarations. The language is rich, almost musical, woven with metaphors about roses, thorns, and the flight of nightingales. The room holds its breath. Is this frivolous? Is it folly? Or is this the way the greatest court in medieval Europe turns the serious business of love into an art form? You sense it's both, playfulness and power, humor and heartbreak. What surprises you most is the fierce seriousness beneath the laughter. These women are not merely passing time. This court is a space where power dynamics shift and secrets are exchanged in veiled phrases. The verdicts passed here can ripple through the alliances and enmities of the nobility, carried in whispered gossip and carefully penned letters. Love is a battlefield as much as the jousting fields outside the castle walls. A lady's favor could mean a knight's rise or ruin. Eleanor, the queen, knows this better than anyone. She invented this court, after all, not merely as entertainment, but as a subtle exercise in control and influence, wrapped in the velvet gloves of poetry and romance. You watch as the knight, cheeks flushed, listens to the judgment. There is no harsh condemnation, no public shaming. Instead, the verdict is poetic justice, an invitation to grow, to understand the true meaning of courtly love, with its rules of honor, patience, and devotion. This is not the brutal, earthy love of peasants or the cruel power plays of monarchs. This is something elevated, a noble ideal, fragile and rare like a crystal goblet. The knight bows deeply, both humbled and honored, and the ladies murmur their approval. For a moment, you feel the pulse of this strange medieval world, a world where love and politics dance so close it's impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. And then, a lady steps forward, her voice soft but firm, to argue a new point. She speaks of a lover who has been unfaithful, weaving her accusation in allegory and verse. The court listens, fascinated, and Eleanor watches carefully, her expression unreadable, but her mind sharp. The conversation twists and turns, each participant keen to outdo the others in cleverness and grace. This is a trial, yes, but one where the weapons are words, and the stakes are hearts. You realize that for these noble women, this is power at its most subtle, an exercise in persuasion, judgment, and the delicate art of keeping one step ahead in a game that has no clear winners or losers. Outside the chamber, the usual noises of castle life fade away. There are no clanging swords, no barking dogs, no barking servants. Here, time seems to slow, suspended between laughter and seriousness, jest and judgment. The tapestry of Venus above sways gently as a draft slips through a cracked window, reminding you that this court is both real and something of a dream, a place where ideals are shaped, hopes are aired, and futures are quietly rewritten. You think about Eleanor as she watches this court unfold. She is a woman who has lived many lives. Queen of France, Queen of England, mother, warrior, poet. Her court is a reflection of her complex spirit, a place where strength is hidden beneath silk and power is wielded with a whispered word. She holds the court together like a weaver, crafting a tapestry of alliances, desires, and secrets. The court of love is her creation, but it also belongs to every woman who dares to speak her mind in a world that often tries to silence them. As the final judgment is pronounced and the knight takes his leave, the ladies settle back into quiet conversation, their smiles more knowing now. You too are left with a feeling of having glimpsed something rare, a medieval moment where love, politics, and poetry mingle in a dance as intricate as the embroidery on the queen's gown. It's playful, yes, but it's also deadly serious. So you left quietly, the flicker of candlelight, painting soft shadows on the walls, listening to the murmur of voices still echoing with verses of devotion and dispute. You've somehow stumbled into the only warm, dry, remotely civilized corner of the medieval world. The Queen's Library. First, let's get your expectations straight. This isn't some soaring marble chamber with stained glass and gold-leafed bookshelves. It's a stone room, smaller than a goat barn, colder than your ex's heart, and lit by exactly one window the size of your face. The rest of the light comes from candles that smell faintly of old meat, but compared to your usual surroundings, rotting hay, screaming pigs, and the ever-present threat of typhus, this place is paradise. You step inside and instantly smell wax, ink, and dry parchment. It's not a comfortable smell, but it doesn't reek of anything dead, which is a major upgrade. There are books, actual books, not just Bibles or tax records or sermons about how everything is your fault. Real books. Some are chained to the walls, like prisoners. Others are stacked like treasures, too valuable to leave alone. Each one took months or even years to make. Some of these texts have outlived empires, kings, and probably the scribe who went blind copying them by candlelight. You approach one. It's bound in cracked leather, stitched by hand, the pages thick like cured hide. You open it carefully, half expecting it to disintegrate or summon a demon. Instead, it's a text from Antioch, written in ink so old, it's almost rust. The script dances across the page. Greek, you think, though it might as well be Martian. There are diagrams of plants and stars, little notes in the margins. Someone, long ago and likely very bored, doodled what looks like a goat with wings in the corner. Another book is from Constantinople. Gold flake still clings to its cover like it's trying not to be forgotten. The letters are sharp and orderly, like soldiers in formation. Inside, philosophy, probably, or political theory. You pretend to understand. You nod seriously, as if contemplating the decline of empires, instead of wondering if lunch will be edible today. Then, something different. A scroll, rolled tight and tied with silk faded to brown. You untie it slowly, half expecting it to crumble, but it doesn't. It whispers open. It smells like spices and dust. The script curves like smoke, flowing right to left. Arabic. You've heard of this? A Moorish scholar's work, brought from Al-Andalus. It's about stars, constellations, calendars, movements of heavenly bodies. It names stars you didn't even know had names. It maps the sky with such precision that you suddenly feel very, very small. A medieval peasant gawking at the universe with dung on your shoes and a mind half full of superstition. You glance up. On a shelf, tucked behind a hunk of crumbling Latin theology, is a slim volume wrapped in linen. You pull it down. It's a book of herbs, handwritten in neat lines. There's a dried flower still pressed between the pages, now brittle and brown. The writer? A nun, judging by the name. She's illustrated the entries, drawings of thistle, valerian, elderberry. In the margins, her handwriting turns chatty. Notes like cures, belly, fire, or good, for when men are foolish. You like her instantly. She knew things that mattered. Everywhere you look, something different. A manuscript from Toledo with astronomical calculations. A French poem written in the precise hand of a court scribe. A book of hours so finely illuminated it might have been painted with crushed gems and angel tears. And here's the thing. This library, this humble, chilly room, is more powerful than a sword, more enduring than a fortress. Every scroll, every book is a rebellion against silence, against forgetting. This isn't just paper and ink. You sit cautiously on a bench that creaks under your weight and probably predates the Black Death. There's no fireplace, just your breath fogging in the air. But you don't care. You are surrounded by the thoughts of people long dead, and somehow they're louder than anything in the castle. Eleanor walks past once, briefly, without saying a word. She nods to you, then pauses beside a shelf and selects a book with the ease of someone who's been doing this since birth. A servant enters, whispers something about supper, about guests, about courtly duties, things that matter outside this room. Eleanor waves them off. She stays. You stay. The candles burn lower. No one talks. It would feel wrong, like shouting during a funeral or belching in church. The only sound is the soft rustle of pages and the quiet crackle of candle wicks. You don't want to leave. You know that once you walk out that door, it's back to the world of dirt floors and chamber pots and people who think a comet means God's angry again. Out there, no one reads. They listen to sermons and rumors and whatever the drunk at the tavern claims he saw in the woods last night. But in here, someone mapped Saturn centuries before your neighbors learned how to wash their hands. You glance at the Moorish scroll again. The scholar had drawn the planets with little faces, labeled them carefully. Venus is smiling. Mars has a frown. Earth is missing entirely. Maybe on purpose. Maybe he knew how bad it was down here and decided to leave us out. One last book catches your eye. It's unlabeled, battered, spine cracked. You open it. Inside, stories, legends. A tale about a girl who outwits a dragon using honey and lies. A knight who saves a village by sacrificing his horse. A queen who rules without permission. It's fiction. Or maybe it isn't. In a world this strange, what counts as truth? You close the book. You breathe the dusty air. And for a moment, you understand something that no sermon, no night, no battlefield ever taught you. Words outlive everything. Suddenly, the dusty road outside the castle gates stirs to life as the sound of pounding hooves grows louder. A thunderous parade of war horses approaches, their iron-shod hooves striking the dirt like a heartbeat echoing through the land. The Duke, Henry, Eleanor's husband, has returned. His arrival is less a warm homecoming and more a collision of worlds. You can almost taste the tension in the air, thick as the dust clouds trailing behind the horses. Henry's retinue is a study in sharp lines and sharper eyes, clad in armor that glints dully under the pale afternoon sun. His English advisors ride close by, faces set in the hard expressions of men who have just come from war councils, political intrigues, and whispered deals. Their presence feels like a shadow creeping over Eleanor's court, a reminder that this place, despite its cultured air, is a battleground not just of swords, but of wills. You notice the glances exchanged between the soldiers and the courtiers, thinly veiled suspicion, and maybe even a trace of contempt. This is not a reunion of equals, but a tense negotiation under the guise of ceremony. Eleanor herself stands near the great hall entrance, calm but unyielding. Her gaze is steady as the horses come to a halt, and she watches Henry dismount with the same measured grace she applies to everything. From the poetry she composes to the power she wields. Henry's boots hit the stone courtyard with a thud, and for a moment the sound seems to echo louder than the trumpets that announce his return. His eyes sweep across the courtyard and settle on Eleanor. You can almost hear the unspoken challenge in their meeting, a duel of spirits more than of armies. Henry came here for politics. It is what he does. His mind is a battlefield mapped with alliances and betrayals, with power plays and fragile treaties. He is a king's son, an English duke, and every step he takes carries the weight of empire. He has brought with him the cold precision of the English court, its rigid rules and relentless ambitions. The air around him crackles with authority, but it also hums with the strain of unspoken conflict. Eleanor, on the other hand, is a queen, not just by marriage, but by the power of her intellect and charm. Where Henry's rule is steel and blood, hers is silk and flame. She governs with the subtlety of a troubadour's refrain, weaving alliances with words and glances instead of swords. This is her realm of beauty and influence, a sharp contrast to the harsh, pragmatic world Henry inhabits. The tension between them is palpable. You can see it in the quick tightening of Eleanor's jaw when Henry speaks in clipped commands. You notice the flicker of irritation in Henry's eyes when Eleanor laughs softly at a courtier's witty remark. Their marriage is a battlefield of equals, each aware that their power is intertwined, and yet often at odds. Their union, forged by politics, is complicated by passion, rivalry, and ambition. It is a dance with no clear winner. As Henry and his advisors move into the great hall, you catch fragments of their conversation, words like taxes, loyalty, and revenge. Politics in this time is a constant game of survival, and Henry has come prepared to play hard. His English advisors lean in close, whispering strategies and warnings. The language of war and rule spills into the room, grounding the court's lofty ideals in a stark reality. Eleanor listens, her face unreadable, but beneath the surface, a storm simmers. You imagine her thoughts flickering like candle flames in the dim hall, plans forming, alliances shifting, and poetry waiting to bloom into power. She is not just a queen who hosts minstrels and dines with nobles. She is a strategist, a mother, a force of nature wrapped in courtly grace. The arrival of Henry with his war horses changes the rhythm of the court. Where once there was the gentle murmur of troubadours and the soft clinking of goblets, now there is the low hum of guarded whispers and the sharp rustle of silk sleeves brushing against chainmail. Courtiers adjust their stances, some eager to curry favor with the returning duke, others wary of the English influence encroaching on Aquitaine. You realize that beneath the surface of this moment lies a larger story, one of empires colliding, of two cultures bound by marriage yet divided by identity and purpose. Henry, the English duke, comes with his advisors and soldiers, bearing the weight of foreign politics and expectations. Eleanor, the Queen of Aquitaine, remains the heart of her court's traditions and its creative spirit. Together, they are a paradox, partners and rivals, in a kingdom balanced on the edge of change. In the flickering torchlight of the great hall, you watch them negotiate their roles. Henry's voice is firm, commanding attention. Eleanor's responses are measured, often poetic, yet sharp as a blade hidden beneath velvet. The room holds its breath, sensing the power struggle unfolding in quiet words and lingering looks. Outside, the horses paw the ground, restless, as if sensing the tension inside. The wind carries the faint scent of smoke and wet earth, reminders of the battles both seen and unseen that shape this court. You feel the weight of history pressing down, heavy and unyielding. As the evening shadows lengthen, the Duke's arrival leaves a mark, one that will ripple through the lives of everyone in the castle. Politics and poetry have met on equal ground, and the court waits to see which will prevail. For now, you remain a silent witness to this moment, the clashing of two worlds in a time when power was both a sword and a sonnet, and survival depended on knowing which to wield. When Henry II arrived in Poitiers, it was not a lover's reunion. It was a collision of kingdoms. Married in 1152, Henry Plantagenet and Eleanor of Aquitaine ruled more territory between them than the King of France. But by the 1160s, their union had begun to unravel. Henry ruled by might. He was tireless, often ruthless, more at home in the saddle than the salon. Eleanor ruled by influence. She cultivated culture and loyalty through presence, hospitality, and poetic prestige. When he rode into Poitiers, the mood changed. Guards were tightened and conversations were quieted. The Duke had returned, and he did not speak in verse. With him came English knights, administrators, and chroniclers. They saw Eleanor's court as extravagant, perhaps even dangerous. Troubadours were tolerated, but not respected. Debates on love and poetry seemed frivolous to a ruler focused on taxes, borders, and baronial discipline. Yet Henry knew Eleanor's court had power. It was a magnet for the nobility of Aquitaine, a center of soft diplomacy. He let it exist, but under watchful eyes, tensions surfaced quickly. She held court. He held counsel. She ruled hearts. He ruled laws. The cracks in their marriage, once private, now ran like fault lines through the palace stones. This was no fairy tale. It was history in motion. A queen reclaiming her autonomy, a king asserting control. And the court of Poitiers stood at the heart of their Cold War. Now, you're wrapped in a scratchy woolen cloak that smells faintly of damp stone and sheep grease. The court has gathered in the great hall, the hearth blazing high with crackling logs that spit embers like tiny stars. Shadows dance on the ancient beams above, blackened from 100 winters' fires. Candles burn low in their iron holders, dripping wax like slow tears. The air is warm and thick with the scents of spiced wine, roasted onions, and a suspicious foot odor that belongs to someone you're too polite or too fearful to identify. The nobles recline on benches draped with furs, while you sit on the hard edge of a wooden stool near the back. You try not to breathe too deeply. Someone's perfume is battling someone else's unwashed tunic, and both are losing. The dogs have curled up near the hearth, exhausted from fighting over the goose bones left from supper. One lets out a sigh, almost human, and the room quiets. A man steps forward. He's slight, with a sunken chest and a crooked nose, but his eyes shimmer like someone who's seen too much and lived to sing about it. He wears a faded red tunic with a loose belt and mismatched hose, his left leg blue, his right a muddy brown, and his lute looks older than the hall itself. The strings have been patched with twine, the wood darkened by years of campfires and calloused fingers. He strums once, softly, just a single note, and somehow it cuts through the noise like a blade. The laughter dies, goblets are lowered. Even the steward stops chewing his ever-present piece of salted eel. The room listens, not out of politeness. This is a court, not a nursery, but because this moment matters. Eleanor of Aquitaine is seated high above, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm and unreadable in the flickering light. She has summoned music, and the court obeys. The minstrel sings. His voice isn't perfect. It's raw, low, woven with smoke and gravel. He sings in Aquitaine, the old tongue of troubadours, the language of longing. You don't understand every word, but the ache translates. It's a tale of a knight who rode to the ends of the earth for a love that vanished with the morning fog. It's about a lady who waited 20 winters for a promise, broken by a war that no one won. It's about joy that didn't last, and sorrow that never left. The kind of love Eleanor once heard under the stars in Aquitaine, before she wore 2 crowns and buried more than one child. A hush falls across the hall. Even the children stop fidgeting. A knight who spent the evening boasting of his campaign in Brittany now stares into his goblet like it holds a ghost. The lute shivers under the minstrel's fingers, the notes vibrating with an intimacy so sharp you feel them behind your ribs. One string snaps mid-verse. He doesn't stop. He just sings louder, like the break is part of the pain. Tears shine in his eyes, not for performance, not for favor, but because the song is real. The flames sway with the music. The shadows of the courtiers lean forward, as if trying to catch every word. Someone coughs and instantly regrets it. Even the dogs don't move. One has lifted its head slightly, ears perked, listening as if it, too, remembers someone it once loved. The queen watches, her expression softening in a way few are privileged to see. Her mouth doesn't move, but the light catches the corner of her eye, and you think, perhaps, you saw it glisten. The song ends with no flourish, no applause, just silence, thick and sacred. The minstrel bows, his head low. For a moment, no one breathes. Then a gentle sound, like wind across old leaves. The queen claps slowly. Once. Twice. The court follows, cautious at first, then steady, as if waking from a trance. The dogs lie back down. The spell is broken. He steps back into the shadows, and another musician takes his place. This one younger, more eager. His tunic is brighter, his smile too wide. He begins a tale of jests and drinking songs, of cuckolded husbands and naughty nuns. The court laughs. You force a chuckle. But something's shifted. The mood has changed. The magic has passed. Only the memory of that earlier song lingers in the corners of the room, like a perfume you can't name. But no, you'll never forget. You glance around. Some are already whispering again, sliding back into court gossip and petty complaints. A lady picks at a fig tart. A squire flirts with a kitchen maid near the hearth. The steward has returned to his eel. But you sit still, the warmth of the song settling deep into your bones. For a moment, the court of Eleanor felt like something more than power and politics. It felt like a place where grief had a voice, where love was not just a transaction sealed with titles and land, but something sung, fragile, foolish, beautiful. Outside, the wind howls. The tapestries shift against the stone walls like they too are listening. You pull your cloak tighter. The night is long. The fire burns low. The minstrels sing on. And somewhere in the shadows, the Queen of Aquitaine smiles. Not because she was entertained, but because for a brief and precious minute, the court remembered what it meant to feel. The courtyard is alive with chaos again. Not the solemn monkish kind, or the quiet stir of servants who actually run the castle, but the wild, gleeful riot that only royal boys can make when they're armed with sticks and convinced they're warriors of destiny. The 3 sons of Queen Eleanor have declared battle. Richard, Geoffrey, and Henry, the young king, are stomping through the mud with the righteous fury of miniature conquerors. Their wooden swords are too big, too heavy, and carved with more enthusiasm than skill by some unlucky squire pressed into babysitting duty. None of this stops the boys from swinging them like they're forged by Vulcan himself. There's an old tutor somewhere in the background, red-faced and muttering prayers, trying to enforce rules that no one is following. "Don't aim for the face," he might have said once. Too late. Geoffrey's nose is already bleeding, and Henry's eye is swelling shut, but both consider this a sign that the game is going very well. Richard, who is barely 10 and already terrifying, charges like a lion cub raised by war drums. His tunic is filthy. His boots are soaked. His blonde hair sticks to his neck in clumps of sweat. But he grins with the grim joy of someone who knows this is the only thing he's ever going to be good at. Mud flies in arcs. Chickens scatter. A small dog barks in confusion, and then decides it's safer to play dead than intervene. A half-frozen servant girl ducks just in time to avoid being accidentally knighted in the jaw by Henry's flailing blade. The courtyard, once designed for elegant promenades and maybe a joust or two, now resembles the aftermath of a Viking siege, reimagined by children with rich parents and no fear of consequences. The weapons are wood, but the bruises are real. Shins are smacked. Shoulders collide. Geoffrey trips over a root and face plants into a puddle, gets up howling, and swings wildly at the air like he's challenging the gods themselves. No one wins. No one ever does. But still, they fight. Because that's what young princes do when their father is a distant thundercloud and their mother rules with silence more cutting than steel. They fight because no one is watching them with anything softer than expectation. A crow perches on a crumbling parapet and watches the battle unfold with more judgment than the entire court combined. The sky is the color of old pewter, and the wind smells like rain that's thinking about it. Somewhere, far off, the church bells groan in their tower, but no one hears them. Not over the clatter of sticks, the shouting, the stomping, The pure, ridiculous glory of three boys pretending to be kings before they know what it really costs. Their clothes, once fine, are now armor only in theory. Silk sleeves hang torn like battlefield banners. Rich embroidery is soaked through and smeared with grass and blood and pride. But no one stops. No one ever stops. Not even when Jeffrey slips again, and this time screams. Real pain this time, real fear, real cracked ribs maybe. But even that is just a lesson. The tutor rushes in, flapping like a nervous goose, and is immediately ignored. Jeffrey waves him off with the kind of royal arrogance only a middle child can perfect. And so the game resumes. Richard stands taller now, the unspoken general. Henry is flushed and wheezing, his crown metaphorical, his pride dangerously intact. They are children, technically, but only on the outside. Inside, something older hums. Ambition, rage, the vague understanding that someday these games will have real weapons, real battlefields, and real blood. This courtyard is their first theater of war, and they are learning how to lose without surrendering, how to hurt without crying, how to lead without permission. You watch from a shadowed archway, uncertain whether to laugh or recoil. It's ridiculous and ruthless all at once. Three brothers locked in a cycle that begins with play and ends with rebellion, with exile, with betrayal. You don't know that yet, of course. You only see the slashes of sunlight on their wooden blades, the way Jeffrey keeps trying to fight even as he limps, the way Richard never backs down, and the way Henry seems both commander and jester. Desperate to lead, desperate to be loved. A servant finally appears with a tray of water and hard bread, a feeble offering to calm the royal beasts. None of them touch it. They are too alive, too charged with purpose and boyish delusion. They wipe their mouths on their sleeves and slap each other on the back like victorious mercenaries. The tutor counts their injuries and probably writes a letter to his priest. No one says thank you. No one apologizes. The game was the apology. Overhead, clouds begin to gather. They look like armored gods assembling for judgment. The wind sharpens, and the crows begin to whisper among themselves. But the boys do not notice. They are already plotting the next round, already dividing the courtyard into imaginary kingdoms, already picking sides in a war that history has not yet named. Jeffrey climbs a barrel to declare himself Duke of something, and Richard knocks it over without hesitation. Henry laughs and nearly chokes on it. And just like that, the war begins again. Not out of anger, not even for glory, but because they don't know how not to fight. Because the only thing they've inherited more than land or titles is the inability to back down. This is their inheritance. Bruises, strategy, and sibling rivalry refined into a national crisis. As the day ends, the courtyard looks like a battlefield staged by playwrights with too much imagination and not enough adult supervision. The sun gives up and slinks behind the hills. Torches are lit. The air turns colder and the boys are finally herded inside, mud-caked, triumphant, bleeding, and already arguing over who won. The wooden swords are dropped, forgotten for now. But tomorrow, they'll pick them up again, and the war will resume. Because some boys don't grow out of playing at war. They grow into it. You are summoned quietly, wordlessly, by a young page whose face still bears the soft roundness of childhood, though his eyes are alert and grave. He gestures, and you rise from the long bench in the antechamber, where you had been dozing beside a cold goblet of thin wine and the gentle scratch of embroidery hoops. The castle is dim today, draped in the gray hush of a rainy morning. Through narrow, arched windows, streaks of pale water trace the cold stones like veins. It smells faintly of wet wool, beeswax polish, and the must of old books, a scent you now find familiar, even oddly reassuring. The queen is receiving someone important. You can tell by the weight in the air, as if the very stones of the castle are holding their breath. You follow the page through a maze of corridors, past archways where tapestries hang like tired giants, past the quiet scurry of servants who vanish before you can catch a full glimpse of them. Eventually, you are brought to the long gallery, a chamber half lit by tall windows and the flickering flame of wall sconces. It is quiet, but not silent. A hush lives here, punctuated only by the soft rustle of silk and the faint clink of metal. A ring on a wooden armrest, perhaps, or the swing of a chain as someone adjusts a cloak. There she is, Eleanor, Queen of England, Duchess of Aquitaine, seated upon a carved oak chair that is not quite a throne but not quite ordinary either. Her posture is easy but deliberate. She does not fidget. She does not lean. Her hands rest in her lap, one atop the other, and her eyes are fixed ahead, but not unkindly. She is not dressed for spectacle today. No gilt, no crown, no lavishly embroidered gown. Instead, she wears a dark green robe of fine wool, cinched at the waist, with only the faintest shimmer of silver thread at the hem and sleeves. Her hair, streaked now with threads of soft gray, is bound simply with a veil. The absence of ornament makes her seem all the more regal. Nothing hides her. She hides nothing. Before her stands a man in robes of deep violet, trimmed in black and gold. He is not young, and his voice is low, measured, but you cannot hear the words. His ringed hands gesture slowly, reverently. You recognize the garb. This is a bishop, and not just any. The embroidery on his stole marks him as someone from far away. Not Aquitaine, not England, perhaps Poitiers, perhaps Toulouse. He bows deeply and then straightens, clearing his throat before continuing. They are discussing land, tithes, influence, the slow shifting sands of ecclesiastical politics. You catch fragments, abbey in dispute, oversight of relics, hereditary right to endowment. His words fall like stones into the quiet room. He speaks more than she does. In fact, she speaks very little. A phrase here, a nod there, her voice low and clear when she does. Her silence is not ignorance. It is not deference. It is power. She listens in such a way that the bishop leans forward, his words tumbling faster, almost nervously. He senses it too. She already knows. Perhaps she knew before he walked in. Perhaps she's simply allowing him to speak so that he may convince himself the ideas were his own. It is strange to watch a queen rule without raising her voice. No orders barked, no declarations, only the occasional narrowing of her eyes, a small tilt of her head, a flick of her fingers for wine that she does not drink. The bishop speaks now of loyalty, of the church's loyalty to the crown, to the queen's piety, to her wise governance. It is flatteringly vague. She raises one eyebrow, a pause. The room feels tighter, as though the stone walls themselves have leaned closer. When she finally speaks at length, her voice carries a kind of tired authority, like someone who has heard every argument already, but is still willing to hear it one more time. just in case there's something new. God has many houses, she says quietly, but some are better kept than others. The bishop murmurs assent. A moment of silence follows. You watch him look down at his shoes, then up again, as if searching for something more to say. A tray is brought, small, plain, 2 goblets, a jug of wine. They do not toast. Instead, the queen gestures to a steward who pours 1 cup and offers it to the bishop. She does not take one herself. He hesitates, then accepts. Another signal. Another subtle reminder of who hosts whom. And then, almost suddenly, the moment is over. The bishop bows, a little lower this time. She nods, but does not rise. He exits through the same door he entered. The steward collects the untouched 2nd goblet and pours it into a basin. The queen turns her gaze toward the windows. The rain has softened into mist. You remain still, unsure whether to leave or await dismissal. But she speaks again, not to you, but as if to herself. Even the church needs reminding. Power listens differently when it's made to wait. She says no more. Outside, the rain continues. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, perhaps for the midday meal, perhaps for prayer. The castle breathes again. Servants move. Voices return in soft hums from unseen corners. The queen remains seated, her thoughts hidden beneath that calm, heavy gaze. You wonder what it is like to hold such knowledge in your hands, to measure out every word like coin and have kingdoms in the balance. You take your leave silently. Your boots tap softly on the flagstones. The next day began like most others in Eleanor's court, with the quiet busyness of those who had learned to work while pretending not to be working. The sounds were soft. The brushing of fresh rushes over old stone, the clink of pitchers being set beside basins, the distant bleating of sheep from the outer pastures. Even the courtiers murmured instead of spoke, their words dissolving into the high, vaulted ceilings like steam. Yet there was something beneath it all that felt expectant, like the air had thickened slightly with the scent of anticipation. It wasn't a storm, not yet, but something old and distant had begun to make itself felt. And then, without fanfare, a single scroll arrived. It was carried by a page whose steps were too fast, whose hands shook just enough to betray the weight of the object he held. The scroll bore the seal of the papal chancery, pressed deep into scarlet wax, unmistakable in its solemnity. No one asked what it contained. They already knew it wasn't an invitation to feast. It was a strange thing to watch power take the form of parchment. The letter from Rome was not large, not ornate, but it carried with it the full shadow of the Vatican, the weight of Latin sentences drafted by scribes in high-ceilinged rooms, sent across mountain passes and down river routes to reach a woman in a stone keep who had, apparently, gone too far. Papal letters were rarely friendly. They were reminders, more often than not, of limits, of roles, of obedience. And this one, everyone suspected, was no exception. Eleanor's reign had not been without murmurings, nor had her influence over her sons escaped the notice of those who believed spiritual matters were best left to men in robes. The arrival of the letter confirmed what many already whispered, that Rome had turned its gaze upon her, and that gaze was not gentle. When Eleanor received the scroll, there was no outward reaction. Those present in her solar noted the precision with which she held it, neither too tightly nor too loosely, as if it were simply one more matter to be handled, like the scheduling of a hunt or the rearrangement of her court's travel itinerary. The room was quiet as she read. The only sound came from the fire, which cracked and sighed in the hearth beside her, casting faint shadows that trembled along the stone walls. She did not ask for silence. She did not need to. The stillness settled naturally, as if even the air had learned not to interrupt a queen when she read something from Rome. Those who stood nearby could only guess at the contents, mentions of annulment, perhaps, or concern over her political maneuvers, or gentle but pointed suggestions that she consider stepping back. No one would know the exact phrases, but the tone could be imagined, measured, patronizing, cloaked in sanctity. It was what happened next that no one forgot. When Eleanor finished reading, she stood, moved to the fire, and without ceremony dropped the scroll into the flames. The act was not dramatic. It was not rushed. It had no theatricality to it at all, and that made it all the more potent. The parchment curled immediately, recoiling from the heat, the wax softening into a puddle of dull red. Bits of script, ink painstakingly written by monastic hands, crumpled into ash before any could be preserved. There was no trace left of what Rome had sent. No copy, no reply, no acknowledgement. Only a quiet, controlled obliteration. The flames consumed the message entirely, and in doing so, they consumed the expectation of submission that came with it. In that moment, something subtle shifted in the court. It was not a declaration, nor a rebellion. It was simply a refusal. A queen, having received a message from the center of Christendom, had chosen not to respond in the way expected of her. She had neither obeyed nor protested. She had merely removed the letter from existence. For those who witnessed it, the implications were not immediately clear, but something deep within them understood what had just occurred. Power had passed through the room in silence. It had been greeted, evaluated, and dismissed with fire. Afterward, the day resumed, as days always do. But the air itself had become sharper, as though everyone now understood, in some quiet part of themselves, that letters could be burned, and that queens could choose to read, then erase. You wake to the cool hush of twilight, the kind of silence that only settles when the court has eaten, the horses have been stabled, and the air smells like wet stone and fading sun. The walls of the great hall are still humming from the feast, but out here, beyond the torches and the polished bronze platters, the gardens are soft with shadows. You hear the swish of fabric before you see them. Two figures, walking slowly between the garden's inner paths. One is the queen, unmistakable in the way she holds her spine, her shoulders straight even now. The other is a woman from Castile. You remember her from the feast, a widow with 3 sons and a single daughter, wearing the kind of silk that whispers. Their steps are measured, deliberate, not hurried, but not aimless. They speak softly, voices too low for words to carry. But the tone is unmistakable, business cloaked in courtesy. You keep a distance, far enough not to intrude, close enough to catch the edges of a plan. The garden has a design, not the wildness of a forest or the simplicity of a monastery courtyard. It's structured, deliberate. Rosemary grows in perfect squares. Vines climb carefully woven trellises shaped like arches. The stone paths curve just slightly at the edges, so your eyes are always drawn forward into some next hidden alcove. A fountain trickles somewhere out of view, its water catching the last bits of light like coins thrown in from another century. You wonder how many secrets this place has heard, how many promises spoken between hedgerows, how many marriages plotted with the same care as a war. The queen moves like someone who owns not just land, but time itself. She pauses to touch a branch, to breathe in the rain-drenched blossoms of a white rosebush. The woman from Castile speaks again, gesturing subtly. Her hands trace small arcs in the air, gestures of inheritance, of titles passed, of daughters matched with men whose names are as heavy as their swords. These are not fairy tales. They are contracts dressed in satin. You realize, standing among the damp earth and early stars, that marriages here are not beginnings. They are maneuvers. The court of ELEANOR is a game board where children are bishops, queens, and pawns alike. The scent of lavender deepens the further you walk. It lingers in the folds of your wool cloak and curls in the cold night air like smoke. Beneath your feet, the ground shifts slightly, the gravel softened by rain. Every step you take is muffled. Even your breath seems too loud. But you keep walking, drawn by the shape of this moment, as if watching it will somehow explain the rest of the court's puzzles. Why a word spoken lightly at dinner might turn into a treaty. Why ELEANOR watches people as if reading a manuscript. The queen tilts her head as the other woman speaks, and her expression is unreadable. You've learned that about her, too. Her emotions are rarely where her face puts them. Joy might show up as quiet, anger as perfect stillness, agreement as a flick of the wrist. But tonight, she is listening with care, you can tell. A daughter, hers or someone else's, will marry into power. A dowry will be arranged, and with it, allegiance. She nods once, the way a stonemason might nod after setting a cornerstone into place. The conversation is nearly finished. From where you stand, you can just see the edge of a stone bench, moss-covered and curved like a crescent moon. The queen rests her hand on it for a moment before turning. The other woman touches her arm, lightly. And that is all. No dramatic farewells. No vows. Just quiet steps back toward the castle. You wait a little longer after they disappear, standing alone under the gathering dark. The garden feels different now, emptied but not abandoned, as if its purpose has passed through it, like wind through open windows. You kneel beside a bush of rosemary and run your fingers across its leaves. The scent clings to your skin. It smells of memory and meals and old prayers. You think of all the things said in this place that were never written down. The next day, you've been invited to a feast. Not just any feast, but one hosted by ELEANOR of Aquitaine herself. Tonight is the feast of Saint Hilary, patron of scholars, defenders of faith, and, as it turns out, people who really know how to put on a banquet. You step into the great hall, and it hits you. No, not the heat from the roaring fire or the tang of roasted meat. It's the noise. A soft chaos of clattering goblets, muttered Latin, laughter in at least 3 languages, and a harp that's trying very hard to compete with a drunk nobleman singing in the wrong key. ELEANOR's court is not a place of silence. It's alive, like a tapestry that's come unstuck and started to move. Every square inch of the hall is filled with color, motion, smoke, and smell. You are no longer in your time. You're in hers. The ceiling beams groan under the weight of garlands, ivy, dried roses, and oranges studded with cloves. There are tapestries along the walls, each one depicting someone noble, stabbing someone else noble in a very artistic way. Servants rush past with trenchers of bread, ewers of honeyed wine, and bowls of something steaming that smells both intriguing and slightly dangerous. No forks, of course. This is the 12th century. You're going in with fingers and prayer. Your seat is humble, but close enough to see the royal table. And that's when she enters. Eleanor. Not in gold or jewels, but a deep blue gown that catches the torchlight like starlight trapped in velvet. Her hair is braided with ribbons the color of dusk, and on her fingers are rings that whisper of Damascus and Venice and long-forgotten kings. She walks like someone born to command, and she is. But not with volume, with gravity. Everything in the room seems to lean a little in her direction. Then the food arrives. And by food, we mean an onslaught. A slow parade of excess on silver platters and wooden boards, and the occasional tile of stone. Whole roasted boars with apples clenched in their jaws like they're still hoping for a second chance. Trout baked in wine and herbs and staring at you like it remembers having dreams. Custards molded into towers and castles, and one very sad-looking griffin. There are pies with hidden messages inside, artichokes stuffed with mint and regret, sugared figs from Spain, and wine. Red, white, pink, cloudy, spicy, sour, and possibly sentient. The pomegranate wine comes in a carafe shaped like a falcon, which seems unnecessarily aggressive for a fruit beverage, but you drink it anyway, because it's that, or the mead that smells like it was brewed in a boot. The taste is strange, sweet, sharp, alive, like biting into a jewel. Your lips are stained crimson, your dignity slightly less intact. Eleanor raises a goblet, silver enameled with ivy and clearly older than some of the dukes in the room. She lifts it high, and the room hushes, not out of fear, but respect. She speaks, not in French, not in Latin, but in Aquitaine, the language of poetry, troubadours, and seduction. You don't understand a word, but you understand the way her eyes scan the room, the way her voice lilts like wind through stained glass, the way she smiles, not with her lips, but from some secret place behind her eyes. It's not just a toast. It's a spell, and you're under it now. The music resumes, this time with fewer hiccups. A harp, delicate and deliberate, weaving notes like silk threads. A flute joins in, high and reedy, sounding vaguely like a bird asking for directions. The table is alive with conversation. You catch phrases: crusade, inheritance, Navarre, cheese. You nod politely, pretending to understand. No one minds. Everyone here is pretending something. Someone drops a trencher. It lands with a splat that echoes across the stone floor. A falcon perched high in the rafters screeches disapproval. A jester tumbles by in yellow tights that do no favors for anyone involved. You eat what might be a turnip tart, or possibly a very old cheese wrapped in sadness. Either way, it's warm and you're grateful. The hall grows warmer, louder, stranger. The flickering torches paint the walls with shadows that seem to move just a second too slow. The banners flutter, even though there's no wind. Someone is reciting a tale near the fire. A knight and a dragon, and something about a misinterpreted prophecy. You try to follow, but your belly is full, your limbs heavy, and the pomegranate wine is beginning to hum gently in your blood. Dessert arrives, as if anyone still has space in their stomach or soul. Marzipan fruits so delicate you feel guilty biting into them. Tiny cakes flavored with rosewater and dusted with powdered sugar carried all the way from Sicily. A sweet custard served in a polished oyster shell. You eat it, though you're not convinced it's not a prank. Someone begins to dance. The music picks up. A drum, a rebec, the low throb of a psaltery. Feet stomp. Hands clap. You sit still. You don't want to wake up from this. You don't want to return to your world of electricity and silence and screen glow. You want to stay here, in the firelight, in the noise, with the queen who speaks in a language you don't know but understand anyway. Eventually, the feast fades. The fire burns lower. The musicians soften their playing, notes trailing into smoke. Guests drift off like leaves in a slow current. Eleanor stands, offers one last glance at the hall, and disappears behind a tapestry embroidered with vines and lions. Tonight, your ears catch the low murmur of a visiting knight, a man weathered by battlefields far beyond these familiar stone walls. His cloak is heavy with dust from the roads of Antioch, Jerusalem, and Acre, names that echo like distant thunder in the annals of the Crusades. He stands before Eleanor, a queen who listens with a stillness that commands respect, her eyes sharp yet distant, as if her thoughts are tracing paths across those same barren deserts and ancient cities. The knight recounts stories of sieges and prayers, of the unforgiving sun beating down on armor, and the bitter betrayals woven into alliances forged under banners of faith. His voice carries the weight of 1,000 hardships, but the crowd's restless whispers fall away, silenced by Eleanor's calm presence. You realize, as you watch her, that she has seen more of the world's raw edges than any of the kings who claim power around her. Her silence is not absence, but reflection, a memory forged in fire and sand. Eleanor's gaze flickers to a distant horizon, conjuring images of distant lands where stones were broken by swords and souls were tested by faith and fate. This is not a queen who rules only by right of birth or crown. She commands through experience and a sharp understanding of human frailty. Listening to the knight's tale, you catch the faintest glimmer of pride, mingled with sorrow, as if she carries the weight of those lands and battles within her heart. To Eleanor, these stories are not just legends. They are fragments of her own life, woven into the tapestry of her identity. The knight speaks of Antioch, that ancient city steeped in legend and blood, where faith and politics clashed beneath a scorching sun. You imagine the siege laid bare, walls trembling under assault, the desperate cries of soldiers, and the stench of death mingled with incense rising from hastily erected altars. Eleanor's mind drifts there, to moments when hope was a fragile flame, flickering against overwhelming darkness. She has not forgotten the sharp betrayal by those who promised loyalty and then turned away, leaving friends and armies to fall. These memories are etched deep, and in her silence, you feel the pulse of history itself, raw, unyielding, alive. As the knight's voice fills the hall with tales of Jerusalem, you picture the holy city through Eleanor's eyes, golden domes glinting under the relentless sun, shadowed alleyways where whispered prayers mingle with the clang of swords. Here, faith was both shield and sword, a cause that inspired and consumed. Eleanor's quiet listening becomes a bridge across time, connecting the polished stones of her court to the dust-choked battlefields of the East. Her presence suggests a wisdom born not just from power, but from surviving the cruelty and beauty of those harsh lands. You sense that she carries these memories not as burdens, but as a mantle of strength, a reminder that the world beyond her court is vast, dangerous, and endlessly complex. The knight's tale moves on to Acre, the last Crusader stronghold, where desperation met valor in a deadly dance. Eleanor's thoughts travel there, to a place where hope clings to life like a flickering candle in the wind. You imagine the siege that drained the strength of even the bravest, the dwindling supplies, and the harsh winter nights spent huddled beneath stone ramparts. It was a place where faith was tested, and many dreams were shattered. Eleanor's calm face reveals nothing, but you know that such stories live within her, etched into her very soul. She is not just a listener, she is a keeper of histories, a woman who understands the price of power and the sacrifices hidden beneath the gilded surface of royalty. As the knight finishes his recounting, the hall remains quiet. The weight of his stories settles like dust in the afternoon light, filling the room with a reverence that transcends time. Eleanor's steady gaze lingers on him for a moment longer before she turns away, her thoughts still drifting across deserts and cities far from her castle walls. You realize that her legacy is built not just on crowns or battles won, but on the memories of a world she has seen, the triumphs, the losses, and the unyielding spirit of those who lived through it all. You've settled into the quiet stillness of Eleanor's chamber, and the air shifts as her thoughts drift away from the stone walls and flickering candlelight. In a rare moment, Eleanor's voice breaks the silence, carrying you far from here, to a sun-drenched city, framed by desert sands and ancient walls. Antioch. The name hangs in the air like a whispered secret, heavy with memory and meaning. What you realize then is that history is not some dusty book on a shelf for Eleanor. It is alive, burning fiercely inside her like the desert sun she once endured. The sun in Antioch was relentless. It didn't simply shine, it scorched. Days bled into one another beneath a sky so vast and merciless that the horizon seemed to blur into endless heat. There was no shade that truly sheltered you, only the faint promise of nightfall, when the air cooled just enough to catch a breath without tasting dust. Eleanor remembers the way the sun cracked the earth into jagged pieces, how the very stones beneath her feet seemed to sweat with the weight of the heat. The city itself was a paradox, ancient and eternal, yet battered by war and longing. Walls built by Romans and Byzantines bore the scars of countless battles, the gates marked by the relentless siege of crusaders and defenders alike. But it was not just the physical hardship Eleanor recalls. Antioch was a crucible of betrayal and fragile alliances, where trust was as scarce as water in the desert. The promises made under the flickering torchlight were often broken by dawn. Alliances shifted like the sand dunes outside the city, and friends sometimes turned to foes with quiet, devastating ease. Eleanor's heart carries the sharp sting of these betrayals still. The silent looks passed behind closed doors, the whispered deals that unraveled the fragile hope the Crusaders clung to. Each broken vow felt like a dagger plunged deeper into the city's already bleeding walls and into Eleanor's own spirit. She had learned that war was not just fought on the battlefield, but in the shadows, where words cut as sharply as swords. Yet, even in the midst of this harshness, there was a strange and fragile beauty that Eleanor clings to. Antioch was a jewel buried in the desert's harsh embrace, a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary collided. She remembers the narrow, winding streets lined with merchants from distant lands, their stalls bursting with spices, silks, and stories. The scent of frankincense mingled with the sharp tang of sweat and dust, creating a heady perfume of survival and hope. Gardens hidden behind stone walls offered brief respites of shade and color. Jasmine and orange blossoms perfumed the air, a fleeting luxury amid the grit and grime. The city hummed with a rhythm that was both ancient and immediate, the beat of life pressing onward despite the chaos that surrounded it. In Eleanor's memory, Antioch was also the sorrow of seeing beauty shattered by conflict. She recalls the families torn apart, the children who played in the shadow of siege engines, their laughter a fragile defiance against the grinding weight of war. The nights were long and filled with prayers whispered in the dark, candles flickering against the vast silence, desperate for mercy or deliverance. The faces of those who fought beside her, and those who suffered quietly beside them, haunt her still. They are etched into her soul, reminders of courage and loss, intertwined like the stones of the city's ancient walls. The siege itself was a slow and grinding torment. Eleanor remembers the hunger, gnawing like a beast in the belly of the city, how the scarcity of food turned neighbors into strangers, and desperation into despair. The water ran low. Wells were poisoned or dried up. Every day was a battle for survival as much as for control. The clatter of armor and the cries of the wounded became the soundtrack to a city caught between hope and ruin. And beneath it all, Eleanor's heart beat steadily, a silent witness to the endurance of those who refused to surrender, not just to their enemies, but to the creeping shadow of despair. Yet, it was in these moments of suffering that Eleanor found a strange kind of strength. The faith of the people, warriors, priests, mothers, and children, was a light in the dark. She remembers the quiet dignity of monks chanting in the ruined chapels, the steadfast prayers of women weaving garlands and tending wounds, the unspoken bond between strangers, forced to share the last crust of bread. Antioch was a city broken, but not defeated. It was a place where the human spirit burned fiercely, even when the world seemed determined to snuff it out. Eleanor's memories do not gloss over the cruelty and hardship, but they also hold space for the moments of grace that sustained her. The kindness of a stranger sharing a rare drop of water, the rare feast when new supplies arrived like a blessing from the heavens, the brief moments when the sun set and the desert sky turned a deep violet, as if the heavens themselves mourned and celebrated the day's survival. These memories, vivid and raw, remind you that Eleanor is not just a figure of political power. She is a woman who has lived through the fire of history, carrying its scars and its light within her. You realize that Eleanor's time in Antioch shaped everything she is now. The desert sun may have burned her skin, but it also tempered her resolve. The betrayals she endured taught her the delicate and dangerous dance of trust. The beauty she witnessed, even amid destruction, gave her a sense of hope that would not be easily extinguished. Antioch is not a distant chapter in her life. It is the core of her story, a living memory pulsing beneath the surface of her calm exterior. As she finishes speaking, The room feels charged with the weight of those distant days. You sit in silence, wrapped in the vivid tapestry of Eleanor's past, a world where the line between beauty and sorrow was razor thin, where every day was a battle for survival and faith, and where history was not written in grand tomes, but carried quietly in the hearts of those who lived it. And now, in this moment, you carry a piece of Antioch with you too, an echo of a sun-drenched city, of battles fought in the heat and dust, and of a woman who remembers it all with both sorrow and fierce grace. This memory, fragile and fierce, reminds you that beneath the crown and the courtly grace lies a life marked by endurance, shaped by fire, and forever bound to the city where history and humanity met under the unforgiving desert sun. The chapel is a quiet refuge in the sprawling chaos of Eleanor's court, a small sanctuary where the weight of crowns and political intrigue momentarily lifts, replaced by the solemn rhythm of faith. As you slip inside, the soft flicker of hundreds of beeswax candles casts dancing shadows on the worn stone walls, their golden light catching on ancient frescoes faded by time and countless prayers. The scent is a mingling of melting wax, damp stone, and the faint trace of incense. Though incense is a luxury more often reserved for grander cathedrals or special feast days, here the air carries a hum not of voices, but of devotion, a low murmur of Gregorian chant, rising and falling, swelling and receding like the tides. The sound isn't just music, it's a pulse, the heartbeat of a community gathered in quiet reverence, each note weaving a thread of hope, sorrow, and penitence through the chilly chapel air. You find Eleanor kneeling near the front, her figure a study in grace and calm beneath the vaulted ceiling. She's dressed simply today, no heavy jewels or rich embroidery, but the plainness only highlights a certain regal dignity. Her hands rest lightly in her lap, and her eyes are lowered in contemplation, framed by the soft glow of candlelight. A simple wooden cross hangs from a thin leather cord around her neck, its rough-hewn edges a stark contrast to the gilded trappings usually associated with royalty. This is the Eleanor few outside these walls see, the private woman who seeks quiet strength in her faith amid the tempest of her life. Her daughters kneel beside her, a scene of maternal tenderness amid the grandeur of their noble upbringing. The younger girls clasp their hands awkwardly in prayer, their voices joining the chorus of the choir, while the eldest, already aware of the heavy expectations upon her, mirrors her mother's solemnity with a quiet seriousness beyond her years. The Mass is a daily ritual, but it is never mundane. Each morning, the chapel fills slowly, the court gathering in hushed reverence, cloaked figures in embroidered gowns alike, bowing to the unseen presence that the ritual summons. The clergy, robed in deep crimson and gold, chant from the pulpit in Latin, their voices weaving ancient prayers and psalms into the fabric of the morning. It's a language most of the court cannot understand fully, but the sound carries meaning beyond words, an invocation of divine order in a world ruled often by human chaos. The rhythm of the chant, steady and repetitive, seems designed to quiet the mind and steady the soul, to invite each listener to step beyond the worldly cares that follow them like shadows through the day. As Eleanor listens, a faint crease of worry sometimes touches her brow, a reminder that faith here is no simple comfort, but a steady anchor amid the storms of power struggles, betrayals, and battles, both political and personal. The chapel's stone floor is cold beneath your knees, unforgiving and hard, a reminder that comfort in these moments is scarce and hard-won. You notice the flickering candlelight casts long, wavering shadows that stretch toward the rough-hewn wooden altar, itself worn smooth by generations of worshippers. There are no stained glass windows here, only narrow slits cut into the thick stone walls, allowing thin shafts of morning light to pierce the semi-darkness, illuminating motes of dust that drift silently in the beams. Outside, the castle bustles with activity, servants rushing about, pages clattering across courtyards. But inside this space, time seems to fold in on itself, the outside world reduced to a distant hum beyond thick walls. Even the court's usual hum of gossip and intrigue is silenced here, replaced by a profound quiet that settles over the congregation like a protective cloak. Eleanor's faith is deeply personal, rooted in the simple gestures of these morning rituals rather than the grand spectacle of her public role. The cross she wears, small, worn, and unadorned, is a symbol not of display, but of devotion, a quiet testament to the private battles she fights as much within herself as outside in the turbulent courts of Aquitaine and England. The Mass is a moment of surrender and renewal, a daily chance to seek forgiveness for the burdens of power and to gather strength for the relentless challenges ahead. In this place, surrounded by the flickering light and the sacred chants, Eleanor is not just a queen or a mother of kings. She's a woman wrestling with faith, doubt, and hope in equal measure. Her eyes close briefly, and a shadow of peace crosses her features, a rare gift in a life marked by political storms and family strife. The prayers offered here, whispered and sung, speak of mercy, justice, and the fragile hope of salvation. They remind the court of something larger than crowns and alliances, something eternal beyond the stone walls and flickering candles. This daily devotion is a tether connecting Eleanor and her daughters not only to each other, but to a tradition that stretches back centuries, through plague and war, through triumph and loss. It is a quiet rebellion against despair, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, faith can be a light. No earthly power can extinguish. For Eleanor, who has seen empires rise and fall and witnessed the capricious nature of favor and fortune, these moments kneeling in the chapel are both an escape and a source of unyielding strength. As the Mass draws to a close, the final prayers echo softly against the stone, the congregation slowly rising as candles gutter and the first rays of dawn stretch through the narrow windows. Now, you found yourself inside the quiet sanctuary of Eleanor of Aquitaine's private chamber. The soft light of an early afternoon sun slips through narrow windows high above, filtering through stained glass to cast gentle patches of color onto cold stone walls. Here, Eleanor is alone with her thoughts and with her quill. Before you lies a simple wooden table, worn smooth from decades of use, its surface scattered with writing implements, quills carefully trimmed, a small dish of ink, and sheets of heavy parchment. You notice the deep blue ink is freshly pooled, a rich, velvety color that contrasts beautifully with the pale cream of the parchment. Eleanor's hand moves slowly, almost ritualistically, as she dips her quill and begins to write. The sound is subtle, the faint scratching of quill on parchment, the only interruption to the silence, save for the distant murmur of life beyond these chambers. She writes a letter to her daughter, Marie, a young woman coming of age in a world where power, love, and duty are entwined in ways that could strangle or set free. This letter is more than just words on paper. It is a weaving of hope, a blueprint for a future Eleanor herself can only partially see. Each stroke is deliberate, measured, and tender, a mother's careful touch reaching across miles in time. The letter speaks of a new court in Champagne, a place Eleanor dreams will become a haven for poets, lovers, and thinkers, a court of love where the art of language and the dance of romance might flourish amid the shadows of political necessity. The ink Eleanor uses carries a faint but unmistakable scent, a blend of crushed violets and lavender oils, carefully prepared by the Queen's attendants. It perfumes the letter, an olfactory signature meant to remind Marie of home and hearth, even when she is far away. Eleanor often chose violet ink for personal correspondence, believing the flower symbolized modesty and faithfulness, virtues she hoped to instill in her daughter. The letter, then, is not merely informative. It is a keepsake, a fragrant talisman against loneliness and danger. As the quill dances across the parchment, Eleanor's mind drifts momentarily to a small white falcon perched silently on a stand near the window. The bird's feathers shimmer with a soft glow, catching the light and reflecting shades of pearl and ivory. This falcon, a gift from the lush lands of Aquitaine, is more than a pet. It is a symbol of freedom and nobility, a living reminder of Eleanor's heritage. She names it Minerva, after the Roman goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, a fitting title for a creature that soars above earthly troubles with keen eyes and steady wings. Minerva watches the room with golden eyes, unblinking and serene, as if guarding the secrets contained within the letter. The bird's presence offers Eleanor comfort, a quiet witness to her hopes and fears. She imagines Marie reading these words and feeling, in some distant place, the steady heartbeat of a mother's love carried across time and space by the wings of this falcon. The symbolism is clear. Just as Minerva will fly freely across the skies, so, too, must Marie navigate the complex world with grace, courage, and wisdom. The letter itself is a blend of practical advice and poetic longing. Eleanor writes of the importance of language and poetry, of cultivating beauty and honor, even in a world hardened by politics and war. She envisions a court where women like Marie can gather, share stories, and forge alliances, not just through marriage, but through shared intellect and spirit. It is a quiet rebellion against the expectations placed upon noblewomen, a call to be more than pawns on a chessboard. Each line Eleanor pens is steeped in history and emotion. She reflects on her own youth, the passions and betrayals, the triumphs and losses that shaped her. The letter is a bridge from past to future, a delicate thread connecting one generation to the next. It speaks of loyalty, to family, to oneself, and to the ideals that sustain us when all else seems fragile. The words carry the weight of a queen's authority and the tenderness of a mother's heart, bound together in ink and parchment. Outside the chamber, the sounds of the court pulse softly, a faint melody from a distant lute, the rustling of silk gowns, the murmur of conversation. But inside, time seems to slow, allowing a rare glimpse into Eleanor's private world. The The letter becomes a vessel for all the unspoken hopes that shaped her reign and her legacy. As she finishes, Eleanor folds the parchment carefully, tying it with a thin silk ribbon dyed a deep, regal blue, the color of her duchy's heraldry. The letter will soon be entrusted to a messenger, a swift rider, who will carry it across winding roads and through shadowed forests to Champagne. It is a delicate mission, laden with risk, but Eleanor knows the power of words to cross borders and hearts alike. In this moment, Eleanor is not just a queen surrounded by power struggles and alliances. She is a woman, a mother, an architect of dreams. Her letter is a quiet act of defiance and love, a legacy inked in hope. And as you watch her set down her quill and gaze out the window, you realize this is a rare and precious insight, a glimpse into the soul behind the crown. The chamber grows dimmer as the sun dips behind the hills of Aquitaine, and the scent of violets lingers in the cool air. The white falcon preens quietly, its golden eyes reflecting the fading light, watching over the letter and its promise. Somewhere far away, Marie will read these words and feel the echo of a mother's courage and vision, an eternal bond sealed by ink, feathers, and love. But chaos starts like everything starts in a castle, with footsteps that don't belong, with servants who pause mid-task and glance sideways for half a second too long. Something moves through the air, but it isn't smoke or perfume or the scent of yesterday's tallow. It's tension, heavy as wet wool, prickly as uncut linen. Rumors don't arrive on horseback or kick down the gate. They ooze under doors. They nestle between the rushes. They slither into the folds of tapestries and wait. A rebellion doesn't declare itself at first. It drips. A glance between two brothers that lasts a moment too long. A suddenly locked door where there never used to be one. Guards posted in corridors that weren't worth guarding last week. It's in the rhythm of the court, once smooth, now hitching like a poorly tuned lute string. The cooks serve meals with the same wooden platters, but the salt tastes sharper. The meat arrives with too much silence. The hounds bark more, sleep less, and people stop laughing. Not all at once, just enough to notice. Somewhere in the castle, maybe under the stairs, maybe between the chapel and the old wine cellar, a name is spoken too carefully. Then it's repeated. Then it's repeated with emphasis, not loudly, never that. But with that particular kind of breathless reverence that means someone is dreaming of war or power, which in this century are more or less the same thing. The servants hear it first, always. They hear everything. They fold sheets while heirs argue in corners. They pour wine while nobles spill secrets with their cups. And lately, they've started walking faster, not because they're in a hurry, but because they've heard too much. In this castle, rebellion smells like candle wax and parchment, the kind that's sealed in a hurry, hidden beneath floorboards, or burned too quickly to be innocent. The Queen's sons have been writing letters. That's what people say. Letters to France? Letters to mercenaries? Letters sealed with names that haven't been spoken since the last rebellion failed, which is not nearly long enough ago. The handwriting is familiar. The intentions are not. Pages disappear from the chancery. Messengers leave in the dead of night, cloaks pulled tight, eyes forward, mouths shut. The walls of the castle are thick, stone stuffed with lime and hope and centuries of regret. But even they can't keep out the chill that settles when mothers begin to suspect their sons. It's not spoken. Not officially. No proclamations, no decrees. Just a new edge to the Queen's silence. She still walks the corridors, still listens, but now her steps seem calculated, as if each one is measuring loyalty by the inch. She watches, and people start to notice that she's always known more than she said, that she has been taking notes, not just on kingdoms, but on kin. Some courtiers pretend not to hear the whispers. They hum louder, they drink more, they laugh with too much throat and not enough heart. Others begin hedging their bets, sending discreet letters to multiple sons, offering support laced with ambiguity. There is no such thing as neutrality here, only delay. And everyone knows delay is just treason on tiptoe. The nobles start to polish old armor. For a hunt, they say. But there are no hounds in the courtyard. Just stable boys brushing down horses and glancing toward the hills. The castle becomes a map of silences, places where conversations stop, places where people step softer. The stairwell to the tower? Avoided. The old solar where one of the princes used to study war tactics? Suddenly locked. The gardens? Too open. Too many ears in the hedges. Safer to walk indoors now, even if the air smells like damp fur and burnt bread. Safe is a relative term. In a medieval fortress full of family drama and armed men who've read too much poetry about honor. In the kitchens, the bread is baked harder, like it too is bracing for impact. In the chapel, the candles burn longer, lower, as if waiting for confession or conspiracy, whichever comes first. The dungeons get swept out. Casually, of course, just in case someone needs a place to reflect, or disappear. The guards aren't changed, but their eyes linger longer on passers-by. Everyone is pretending nothing is wrong, which, ironically, is how you know something very much is. The Queen doesn't call a council. She doesn't need to. Her stillness is the council. Her presence in a room now clears it faster than a fire, not because she shouts, but because people are afraid she sees too clearly. She's lived long enough to know what ambition looks like from the crib to the battlefield, and she's been a mother long enough to know when her sons are lying. She doesn't accuse. She doesn't demand. She simply exists with the kind of calm that makes other people nervous. The courtiers start praying louder, not because they've found faith, but because when power shifts, you want to be seen praying to the right God. Monks deliver more sermons on obedience. No one listens. The choir sings more solemnly. No one applauds. The storm is still far off, but its name is whispered in corners, mouthed behind closed hands. And everyone, from page to nobleman, is calculating whether they'll be standing on the right side of history or buried beneath it. Outside the walls, riders pass more frequently. Not the kind that wear crests, but the kind that blend into the road. Too well armed for messengers, too silent for merchants. Someone is sending for someone. Some faction is forming, or has already formed. Lines are being drawn with invisible ink, and the castle sits atop it all like a precarious crown. Still, proud, and entirely flammable. Even the birds have started flying wider arcs around the battlements. It might be the weather, or it might be something deeper, something animals sense before men admit it, that something is ending, or beginning. It's hard to tell which. Rebellion doesn't announce itself with a banner and trumpet. It arrives as a feeling, a slow building certainty that loyalty is shifting, that blood is not thicker than ambition, and that castles no matter how old, are still just stones waiting to fall. In the year 1173, everything changed. Eleanor, once the radiant center of Poitiers, the patron of poets, the duchess who had ridden across kingdoms, was no longer just a queen. She became a rebel. Two of her sons, Henry, the young king, and Richard, rose against their father in a sweeping rebellion that cracked the great Plantagenet realm. And Eleanor, never one to sit idly in the shadows of men, supported them. Whether it was out of maternal ambition, deep political instinct, or her ever-present belief in Aquitaine's independence, her involvement marked her as a threat. She had dared to act, not merely as queen, but as a sovereign power in her own right. That act, in Henry II's court, was unforgivable. She was seized and imprisoned, not with a sentence, not even with a public accusation, just the quiet, brutal silencing of a powerful woman. She vanished from court life, shuttled from castle to castle under guard. Salisbury, Winchester, and even Windsor knew her footsteps only as echoes within stone chambers. For nearly 16 years, Eleanor lived like a caged falcon, cut off from the world she had shaped. The court she had nurtured in Poitiers, with its songs and trials of love and learned ladies in silk, faded into legend. And yet, she endured. She waited. In 1189, the long night ended. Henry died, worn by war, wearied by the very ambition he had once admired in her, and with his death came a key. Richard, her son, now King Richard I, ordered her release, not with hesitation, but as one of his first acts as king. The Queen of the South was free again. She emerged, not diminished by age, though she was now in her mid-60s, a span already considered rare in the 12th century, but somehow larger, deeper, as though time had only polished her authority. The years in confinement had not broken her. They had distilled her into something stronger. She did not retire to prayer or rest. Instead, Eleanor moved directly into the heart of government. In 1190, when Richard set out on the Third Crusade, he named her Regent of England. Regent, not merely Queen Mother. She governed in his place, signed royal documents, dealt with disputes, and secured the kingdom while her son fought abroad. And when Richard was captured on his return journey and held for ransom in Germany, it was Eleanor who negotiated tirelessly for his release. She traveled, she corresponded, she bargained, carrying the weight of her son's kingdom on her back, even as the years weighed down her own bones. In 1199, her world shifted once more. Richard died from a wound in battle. The throne passed not to another mighty warrior or polished courtier, but to John, her youngest son, the last child of her long and turbulent marriage to Henry. With John's rise, Eleanor's direct role in English governance came to a close. She had no illusions about the nature of power, nor about the temperament of this son. But even then, she did not retreat fully. She returned to Aquitaine, to the lands of her birth, where her name still inspired reverence, and where she remained involved in affairs of the duchy that had made her who she was. Aquitaine was not simply a territory to Eleanor. It was her heart, the cradle of her culture, her voice, and her legacy. She died on March 31st, 1204, at Fontevraud Abbey, the very same monastic retreat where her ancestors had once prayed and where her own memory would endure. She was buried beside Henry, the man who had once imprisoned her, but with whom she had forged an empire, and near Richard, her lion-hearted son who had freed her. Her effigy lies atop her tomb, not draped in regal battle gear or weighed down with gold, but holding a book in her hands, a symbol of her court, her learning, and the poetry she carried through life. Not the crown, but the written word. That was Eleanor's final emblem. Thus, the great queen passed into history not only as consort to 2 kings, mother to 3, and duchess in her own right, but as a woman who refused to be silenced. Her reign stretched across half a century. Her influence touched the arts, war, religion, law, and the hearts of poets. And even now, centuries later, when the bells of Fontevraud ring and the wind brushes over the old stone cloisters, it's easy to imagine her presence, watching, reading, remembering. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.